Old Testament scripture is from the book of Genesis, chapter 9, verses 8 through 12, page 6 in the Pew Bibles. Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, "As for me, I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the domestic animals, and every animal of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." God said, "This is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. And when I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. And when the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth." God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth."
The next scripture reading comes from 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 18 through 22. And like last week, I'll be reading from the Common English Bible. There's just a few little nuances with it that help the translation. So if you're following along in your Pew Bible, I invite you to kind of notice the differences. Maybe that's a way that God speaks to you this morning. So 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 18 through 22. Christ himself suffered on account of sins, once for all, the righteous one on behalf of the unrighteous. He did this in order to bring you into the presence of God. Christ was put to death as a human, but made alive by the Spirit. And it was by the Spirit that he went to preach to the spirits in prison. In the past, these spirits were disobedient. When God patiently waited during the time of Noah, Noah built an ark in which a few, that is 8, lives were rescued through water. A baptism is like that. It saves you now, not because it removes dirt from your body, but because it is the mark of a good conscience toward God. Your salvation comes through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who is at God's right side. Now that he has gone into heaven, he rules over all angels, authorities, and powers. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So when I was a child growing up, I'd often hear my parents say to me, "Honey, what are you giving up for Lent?" So, "Oh, broccoli and Brussels sprouts, right? Why would I ever want to eat those things? I'll just give them up. It's nice, simple." I couldn't associate giving something up that I enjoyed or loved or liked. It just didn't make sense to me. Why would I self-inflict my stuff with something that I enjoy and not do it for 46 straight days? It just didn't make sense to me. And so sacrificing, suffering was not kind of in my mental bank at that time. So I kind of usually do something like that, silly, and not really give up something that I hold dear to me. But I kind of felt like this process was a little fruitless and contrived and unnecessary in regards to self-inflicting suffering. I just didn't want to do it. But as I age, however, I kind of feel that some lessons in life just cannot be learned until you're older or have had certain life experiences in your journey of life. And I think sacrifice and suffering are a part of that wisdom and that understanding and learning. So as a quick disclaimer, it's always kind of tough to talk about suffering, right? But with the recent shooting at yet another school at Parkland High School, or the Parkland area high school in South Florida, it again kind of brings the forefront and the thought of suffering and how suffering is more complex than we can ever even really imagine. But this type of incident I would almost classify as completely different than the suffering that I'll be talking about this morning. I don't want you to misconstrue my words or misunderstand my message or the context of it. Yes, people will and have suffered greatly from this tragic event. But I'm not a big fan of platitudes, which you have kind of sayings that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger and everything happens for a reason. Theologically, I struggle with that sometimes, and I don't know really how accurate that really is. And so in the meantime, in regards to this recent incident, I feel my heart and everyone's heart hurt, so we certainly can offer our prayers and thoughts for the people, the community, and the families. But at the same time, I think it's time that we do something. I'm not talking about gun control or mental illness or whatever. Just we've got a nation of 300-some million people. We've got to be able to come up with some solution to stop the children from dying, right? That's where my heart lies. That's where I think we should be concerned. We've got to, how many children is going to be enough till we do something? So all of us here today, we can at least brainstorm or think of something that we can send to leaders or other people that we know to try to do something and stop that happening in our country. But anyways, just continue to pray and think for the people and see what we can do. But this is a completely different suffering than what I'll be addressing today, right? So the whole notion of suffering is uncomfortable for people. It makes us uneasy. Me saying it a couple of times probably made you squirm in your seat a little bit, right? We don't like to talk about suffering. We don't like to hear stories in which someone had to endure hardship or pain or disparagement in their life. It makes us feel uneasy. And our heartstrings are pulled greatly when we hear of people's situations and the suffering that we go through. And when we experience it ourselves, sometimes it even feels like physical pain. It can be that real and that hurtful to us. It can feel something that is just overwhelming in life. And so our solution is to just try to avoid suffering in all ways possible. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that's the fact of how we currently deal with suffering in this world. But for some reason, people are just adverse to suffering. Well, I suppose not for no reason. There are reasons that people don't like to do it. No one likes to feel pain or hurt or go through rough patches in life, right? Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that for anybody else. Yet in America, we seem particularly against any and all types of suffering. We attempt to prevent it at all costs, even at the expense of our pocketbooks or other people. Now, for some instances, it makes sense. If we can safely receive pain medication for accidents or procedures, or epidurals for giving birth, which I've never given birth or had one, but I hear they're good, right? We should at least do those. I'm okay with that. Or if we can find a simple and safe and healthy way to reduce or minimize pain in life, then I'm all for that. That's fine. But I think it becomes a problem when we go to extreme measures to prevent or completely get rid of suffering altogether for us, for our children, for our grandchildren, or our spouses, or friends, or loved ones in life. For instance, if our child or grandchild or niece or nephew has an inkling that they're going to shed a little tear, but we usually try to stop and prevent that tear from ever forming or from hitting the ground entirely. We do all that we can to prevent that. And I think in the long run, maybe that's a disservice to the child, at least in the long run. There was a recent study that the church engaged with the young families. We watched this pastor out in California. He kind of dabbled in sports psychology for a little while, so he understood the psychological effects of things in life. He was talking about suffering. And he's had this concept and this theory that we need to learn to suffer well. So at one point he said, by suffering well, we equip ourselves and our children to overcome the points that are inevitable in life. Is that at some point we'll suffer. It's going to happen, no matter who we are or what we kind of do. We'll encounter that at some point in our life. And so by knowing and understanding this, we can equip our children and other people to overcome those moments in which they do face in life. I think of it as kind of a teaching moment or opportunities for growth as a child or as we kind of mature in life. We can't always prevent these moments from happening, but we can equip people to overcome them and persevere and get through them, right? Does it make sense? So that's the concept and idea behind suffering well. So this means that when your beloved child drops a giant bowl of chocolate ice cream, you don't immediately have to fix it right away. You can see if they can recover, what they can do to kind of get past that moment that is the most traumatic moment ever in the world, right? It is sad when we drop our chocolate ice cream, as I said last week, but we've got to help them and equip them to get through that. This means that when they get a vaccination or a scrape, we can help them, yes, but also tell them that not all healing is immediate. And maybe this will help prepare them for future instances of diseases or problems. And so this means that we don't always get what we want. And when they throw a tantrum because they don't get what they want, we just kind of let them be. And after they're done rolling around on the floor and kicking and screaming for what seems like 5 hours, you can get done and tell them, that's not okay. We can go a different way. We don't have to react that way when we don't get what we want. You see, by doing all of this, they'll learn that it takes not only certain things and equipment and knowledge and psychology to handle those situations, but perhaps they can recover and help someone else in the end too. You see, part of this teaching for the children is self-sufficiency, and it also helps them build confidence and overcome those moments by the challenge of teaching them to suffer well. You see, the reason we do this is because eventually in life they'll get a broken heart, right? Eventually they'll feel the pain of loss or disappointment. Eventually they'll have to face the consequences of a bad decision or end up on the wrong end of bad luck or misfortune in their own life. So as a result, we need to make sure that they're molded and shaped in a way that they will not be overwhelmed and succumb to those significantly difficult moments. And so if we give them the proper tools and teach them through these challenging moments so that they can grow and mature and better handle them themselves, and we might be equipped ourselves to handle that when the time arises. And it's hard. It is a long process, especially with kids. I have to tell them 800 times not to throw the food on the floor. You'd think they get it by now, but no. It just looks so convenient. I'm done. There goes the food. Thank you, Tatum, right? But it's a learning and a growing process. So kind of like when we learn to ride a bike. We can't just hop on it and go right away. When we learn to change the tire of a car, we have to make sure the car is propped up and have all these steps so the car doesn't fall on us and crush us as we're under there changing the tire. Or when we change the oil. That might be watering down and simplifying it a little bit, but the learning process is kind of the same. Now think about this. How many times have you been in a situation where you've suffered? And then you have a friend come to you and say, "Oh man, I'm sorry. That stinks. I've never been through that. I don't know what you're going through, but just buck up. It'll be fine. They get over it in a couple of weeks or a month or a year. You'll be good, and then we'll be all happy again," right? Has anyone had that experience? I have. And I feel disconnected to that friend or that person that comes to tell me that. I say, well, thanks, I appreciate the concern, but that doesn't really help me in this moment of my suffering, my pain, and my anguish. So if I've had that and I haven't been equipped to suffer well, how could I kind of shape myself or only rely on my own teachings to do that? I can't always rely on someone to provide that help and support that I need, as that won't always be there. But yeah, I've had that experience, and that really doesn't help me in any way. When you have a friend that does like that, I know they mean well, but it doesn't always come across that way. But think about another way in which we go through suffering. We're maybe facing a darkness in our own life, the loss of a job, or a work environment that's so toxic that we don't want to go each and every day as a struggle to get up and go. Or the struggle with addiction to a substance, a particular food, or detrimental habits. The struggle of feeling isolated or depressed, anxious or fearful or unprepared and overwhelmed. And then our friend comes to us and says, I'm so sorry. I've been through that too. I know how much it hurts. I know how much it pains you. But I'll be here with you to help support you and get you through this. We can get through this together. I can't fix it today, but I can be here to walk with you as we get over this and recover from it. Now, which way is better for you? That second friend, right? Someone coming to you with empathy and compassion and saying, I've been there too. I've suffered just like you have through the exact same experience. We feel such a strong connection to someone like that. It helps us lower our own anxieties and overcome the suffering in which we have. It won't be instant, but it is a much stronger source of support than the approach from the other friend. So this is an account that kind of best illustrates someone's suffering and how it can be used maybe in a way that aids other people. Dr. Abraham Verghese recently wrote in the New York Times Magazine of his experience as part of the medical team helping others during Hurricane Katrina. So over the years, Dr. Verghese had learned to steel himself against the sight of human suffering so that he could kind of do his job. But then one night he treated an elderly gentleman whose home had been destroyed by Katrina. But for 2 days, the man perched on a narrow ledge without food or water. But then he was rescued and dropped off at a local bridge with a bunch of other refugees. And so when Dr. Verghese heard about this, he was deeply moved by the man's story and said the only words that he could think of at the time. He said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." And then the man got up and said, "Thank you, Doc. Those are the words I needed to hear." So afterward, Dr. Verghese thought about the way he always tried to steel himself against human suffering. And he realized that this did not help anyone. You see, the willingness to be wounded may be all that we have to offer. And that's just it. To some extent, we have to have some sort of willingness to be wounded. For if we're protected by that far for so long, then we eventually get to a point where we struggle to relate and connect to others. If we say, "I don't want to suffer, don't give me any suffering or heartaches or trouble in life," how can we possibly connect to others that are doing something in which they are suffering? It's not easy. And the culture of this world will tell us that we're supposed to scrape suffering by or put it under the rug and not deal with it altogether. But in the end, if we do have that experience, we learn to suffer well. We learn to overcome that. Then we can be a beacon of hope for not only ourselves, but other people close to us. See, the crux of it is, as after Christ's experience, God is one who can look to us and say, "I'm so sorry, my beloved child. I know how you feel. I too have suffered. I've suffered greatly. I know your pain and I'm so sorry for it. But I'm here with you. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow too." But that will not make the pain and suffering immediately go away. But it's a certain and sure assurance of my understanding of your situation. The pain that I feel and the utmost love that I have for you, I can relate to. See, ultimately, through all of this anguish that Christ has gone through, from the hunger pangs, to the thirst in the desert, to the torture, to the mocking, to the ridicule, and the immensely painful and humiliating sacrifice on the cross, all of that gave us an opportunity to say, most of us have been there. We've gone through something similar in our own life. We know how it feels. We know how it feels to be rejected, to be shunned, to be made fun of. We know what it's like to experience hunger or thirst, to go through pain or heartache, betrayal, and physical affliction. And see, this too is how God relates to us in our own suffering. Yet Christ was able to do something with his suffering far beyond our own wildest imagination, let alone what we could accomplish. He was able to provide a salvific salve to our suffering. And yes, that's a mouthful. But in the end, we have to remember that we will die. As Ash Wednesday reminds us of our mortality. From dust we came, and to dust we shall return. But think of this. Think of the paradise that God has created for those that do believe and put their faith and love and hope in Jesus Christ. Think of that strength and that salve that Christ has given us to conquer death itself. We've been given the gift of eternal life. In the presence of a place that is completely devoid and null of all pain and suffering. It's as if an eternal healing balm had been given us, the salve to suffering and the salvation that we have been given. But granted, this makes the pains and the heartaches and the suffering and the present, it does make it harder sometimes, knowing that there is maybe grass is greener on the other side. And it won't make all of that suffering disappear, but it can give us hope. It can remind us that this is not how life will end. This will not be our eternal torture or pain or suffering or torment. We won't have to deal with this for eternity. Instead, we will have a life that is filled with pleasantries and peace, and a place that Christ himself lovingly called paradise. All thanks to Christ and his willingness to suffer well for us. Amen.